So what's the best argument that I've heard against theism? Well, this is a little bit difficult to answer in one sense. It's easy in another sense because there's so little to choose among. It's difficult because characteristically people do not offer arguments against theism. They offer complaints against God and against the Bible and against religion, but they don't offer straightforward kind of arguments against theism. And one of the reasons is a lot of atheists don't think they need to. They think that atheism is the default position, that their view kind of is the standard view, even though less than, I think, 2% of the people in the entire world, the population of the globe, hold to that view. They still think it's the standard view, and so they bear no burden of proof. And so generally they do not try to argue in favor of atheism and therefore directly against theism. They just raise complaints. I just want to make an observation that a complaint against the Bible or a complaint against religion or a complaint against Christians is not an argument against God. Just so you don't get those confused. Those are different things. They may be legitimate challenges or points in their own arena, but they're not arguments against God. If you want to disprove God, you have to deal with the assertion or the proposition that God exists, and then give reasons why you think that the proposition God exists is a false one. In dealing with that issue, I've heard very few arguments. In fact, most of the arguments amount to arguments that those are the foundational challenges to that notion are attempts to show that something about the belief in God is incoherent, that is contradictory. Maybe the term God is incoherent. Nobody knows what we're talking about, but it's curious that people have written books against this thing that nobody knows what we're talking about, and I don't know how you could write a book about it if we don't know what we're talking about here. So I don't think that's going to work. The best argument, I think, and I actually think this is the best attempt that I've heard. I don't think it goes through, but it's different forms of the argument from evil. It is the best in terms of being an aggressive challenge. That is, it's an attempt to show that there's an incoherence or a contradiction in the Christian worldview. And that is an aggressive type of defeater. If it goes through, then Christianity is falsified. It also has tremendous rhetorical force and great emotional appeal. That is, it's easy to characterize evil in the world in graphic ways that make people react to it. And it is also something that people feel deeply in their hearts because they have to engage the problem of evil themselves. They have to deal with evil in their lives, and so consequently this is a very, very powerful challenge to Christianity. Now I think it can be met, and there are lots of ways to answer it. There's the deductive problem and the inductive problem. The one that most people are familiar with, the deductive problem, has been largely abandoned by philosophers because they know it's been answered. That is, that there's a contradiction between the idea of there being a good God and a powerful God and evil existing in the world, because it does seem that it's possible that there can be a morally sufficient reason for God to allow evil for a season. And that is, of course, the biblical worldview. It's a piece of the puzzle, it's part of the story, but there's a resolution to it in the end, and God uses evil for good, ultimately. So that's been set aside or largely by people in the know on this issue. It still persists, though, in the popular realm, and the inductive problem, which is that it's unlikely there's a God because there's so much evil, is getting a little bit more traction, but there are answers and responses to that as well. Like I said, I don't think the argument ultimately goes through, principally because the right way to address the problem of evil is not as a philosopher, as a theologian, but as a human being. Meaning that any human being has to ask the question, what worldview gives the best explanation to the problem of evil? Look at just going to atheism because of evil, you're not going to believe in God, doesn't solve the problem of evil. Now you're still stuck with the problem as an atheist. The atheists raised the problem, there is real evil in the world. How do you account for that? When you leave theism, you don't leave the problem behind. You don't escape the problem. You just remove one resource that you have for answering, and that is theism. So the atheist still has to answer the problem, but as John Lennox pointed out, he doesn't get rid of the problem, he just gets rid of hope. The best answer is the answer that provides a worldview perspective that deals best with all aspects of the problem of evil, the existence of evil to begin with, its place in a narrative, and the ultimate solution to the problem. And there's nothing that comes close to the power of Christianity in answering that question. Certainly atheism doesn't do the job, but it does seem it's the best they can do in challenging theism.